Brooklyn for Peace is very happy to welcome all of you to tonight's panel, which we hope will provide new and useful insights into the current political moment. For those of you who are new to our organization, Brooklyn for Peace has been around for more than 30 years, working against war, racism, cutbacks, environmental destruction, and a whole host of other evils. Over the years, we've stood with our sisters and brothers in such righteous struggles as labor solidarity, Black Lives Matter, and the BDS movement. Tonight, we're honored to have with us two people who were tracking right-wing populism before most of us had even heard of Donald Trump. We will, of course, be taping tonight's event for our Brooklyn cable show and for YouTube, so that we can reach a wider audience. But for those of you who wish to pursue this issue in more depth, I want to mention two excellent additional resources on this subject. First, the 2016 edition of the Socialist Register, entitled The Politics of the Right. The articles in it examine the politics, history, economics, and culture of right-wing movements around the world. Of particular interest is the contribution of Bill Fletcher, who's with us tonight, my immediate right. We have a few copies for sale right over here. We're selling them tonight at a discount. The second source around right-wing populism that I wanted to mention is entitled Right-Wing Populism in America, Too Close for Comfort, co-authored by our other speaker, Chip Berlet, over this way. This book is a little bit hard to find right now. You can find it online, use bookstores, so on and so forth. But if you go to the website, and you might want to write this down, rightwingpopulism.us, you will find a wealth of related material, including selected chapters from Chip's book and information about the forthcoming e-version of the book. In addition to our main speakers, we're fortunate to have Juliet Uccelli with us tonight as guest moderator. She's an activist, educator, and author. She's written about public school struggles, Eurocentrism in curricula, and Italian-American identity. She is a contributor to the book, The Cost of Privilege, Taking on the System of White Supremacy and Racism. She helped initiate Italian-Americans for a Multicultural U.S., which has the outstanding acronym, I Am Us.
For my ex, I can't say it.
This organization joined First Peoples in opposing the celebrations of Christopher Columbus a few years ago. She was the founder and education director of the New York Marxist School / Brecht Forum, which in many ways lives on as the Brooklyn Commons. Without further ado, I give you Juliet Uccelli.
So I'm gonna do both of their bios, then they'll speak, and then we'll have discussion. So Chip Berlet is an investigative journalist and independent scholar, and he has spent over 45 years studying prejudice, political repression, and authoritarianism. He co-authored with Matthew Lyons the book which Gary mentioned, Right-Wing Populism in America, Too Close for Comfort, and edited Eyes Right, Challenging the Right-Wing Backlash. His current work focuses on right-wing populist rhetoric, demagoguery, and neo-fascist movements. His byline has appeared in the New York Times, Boston Globe, Chicago Sun-Times, and The Progressive. It's also been on ABC's Nightline, The Today Show, and in numerous other academic journals and radio outlets such as NPR. So we're very eager to see what he has to say. So now I'll just give you Bill's bio so we won't be interrupted. They can play off each other. So Bill Fletcher Jr. has been an activist since his teen years. On graduating from college, he became a welder in a shipyard and entered the labor movement. He's been active in numerous community and workplace struggles in several unions and was a senior staff person in the National AFL-CIO. He's also the former president of Trans-Africa Forum, scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies, editorial board member of the Black Commentator. He's the co-author with Fernando Gapacin of Solidarity Divided, about the crisis in the labor movement, and the indispensable ally, Black Workers in the Formation of the CIO, that he's the sole author of, and he's also the author of They're Bankrupting Us and 20 Other Myths About Unions. Okay, so first we'll hear Chip, and then we'll hear Bill. Go.
Thank you. So what's going on? I mean, we have the right-wing Republicans. We had the Tea Parties, and they're actually still there. They just don't get reported on. The Koch brothers, Ted Cruz, a nightmare. Donald Trump, a nightmare. The Patriot Movement, Oath Keepers, Oregon Standoff, and New World Order conspiracy theories, including Obama is a Muslim, which, if you don't think is widely believed in certain right-wing movements, you'd be wrong. So what are the linkages? I think it's important to understand that the idea of right-wing populism goes back to the first right-wing populist movement in America, which was the Ku Klux Klan. That's a revised version of sociology, because up until about 1985, no one would say that. But now this is considered really to be a fact, that before the Populist Party, which we all learned about, there was a regressive, racist, right-wing populist movement in America. But, you know, times change, analyses change, and that's important to understand, because it helps us understand how embedded in US society are these ideas of who are the real people, who are the people who belong here, and who are the people who are outsiders. Now, it's all about a power struggle. It involves race, gender, and class. Where basically the left is protecting people while trying to replace the oligarchy of the 1%. So it's a power struggle that involves not just politics, but social movement organizing. And it's very important for us to understand what is behind the narrative and the minds of the people that are promoting a lot of these ideas. Now, I want to mention the name of Margaret Canavan, who actually wrote the first book in 1980 that said, look, you schmucks, there are right-wing populists. What is it with Americans? All that they can think about is the People's Party. So she wrote this immense book, cleverly titled Populism, which said there's left-wing populism, there's right-wing populism, there's politicians' populism. Sometimes political elites pose as populists, to use rhetoric, to build a mass base of right-wing populism. She figured this all out and laid it out. This book, no one paid any attention to it unless you were totally fixated on this issue, which is a shame because she was the first person to explain it. You then have a book which really didn't seem to fit the mold by Peter Fritschie, who went to Germany with computers and did number crunching and was able to show that the mass base for fascism in Weimar Germany were the petty bourgeois burger class who switched to vote to throw the bums out, not believing Hitler would be elected. So, in other words, there was a large group of people who dismissed Hitler politically as an idiot, but they were so tired of the gridlock, does this sound familiar? So tired of the gridlock in Germany during this period and the economic collapse and the fact that so many working people were starving that they were going to send a protest vote. That was Adolf Hitler. Great. So this is just going to get more fun as I go along. Now, how did this spread so quickly? And there's a bunch of really good books. Michael Kayson's Populist Persuasion. Fritschie wrote Rehearsals for Fascism and then Germans into Nazis. One book is more depressing than the next. And in 2000, we wrote a book called Right-Wing Populism in America, coming out of the militia movement because, as we say in the last chapter, it's going to happen again because the objective conditions aren't changing, they're only getting worse. Then in 2010, Noam Chomsky started talking about Weimar. That was scary because he knows what he's talking about when he talks about Weimar. And in fact, Weimar is the key to understanding what's going on. There's a wonderful group called Facing History and Ourselves that has a whole section on the Weimar period, looking at all of the moments during the Weimar period that liberal, quote-unquote, civil society could have stopped the march of the Nazi movement, but failed to for a variety of reasons. It's chilling to read, and Bookbinder's work is easy to find online. How does this spread so quickly? Well, let's start with the American Creed. Who remembers learning there was an American Creed coming up in school? A guy named Robert Bellah wrote about it in Daedalus, of all places, in '67. According to this analysis, outside of the churches, there exists a core of elements which are limited government. This is what we as a people believe in, according to Bellah. Limited government, religious belief, patriotism, rugged individualism, a constitutional republic, and a free market. Now, this is, in fact, the baseline for almost all civics classes in America. So we teach everyone that this is what America is about. Well, it's what America is about if you're a middle-class white person and not an immigrant, but it's not reality. But it is what we are taught as children and what many of us have internalized. And when we become people who are radicalized, we go, wait a minute, this is not true, it's a lie. And that's a horrible shock. And I suffered greatly going, oh, they lied to me when I was in Eagle Scout. Anyway, I got over it. So there's this wonderful labor organizer in Wisconsin, and Joanne Rica, who I've worked with, she says, look, there's a much easier way to put this in Bellah. And she's a labor organizer. She said, look, it's survival of the fittest. Capital should be served by government. Property rights supersede human rights. And decisions should be made by the elite. That's the American Creed. And when anybody stands up, no matter from what group in society, says, that's ridiculous, there's a pushback. And so we're seeing now the elites working with a lot of other sectors in society saying that there is an attempt to destroy the American dream, even though they destroyed it by siphoning off billions and trillions out of the economy. They are now trying to create scapegoats on which to blame the collapse of the American dream. And it works like a charm every time. So, how does this work? I have this wonderful little thing. I hope you can see it.
Low tech, we love it.
So right-wing populist movements exist between the Republican Party and the ultra-right, like the KKK and the neo-Nazis. They're not the same thing. There are three different actors at play here. There are a lot more, but these are the three basic ones. When the economy collapses and people are scared and they think they're downwardly mobile, they get involved in right-wing populist movements. So what happens? The mainstream party, the Republicans, starts to suck up to them to get votes, and at the same time the extreme right penetrates into these groups and tries to recruit them into armed attacks or beating people up on the street. Oh wait, that's already happening. So the demagoguery of Trump and the people in the Republican Party has already resulted in attacks on Muslims, on black people, on immigrants, on women, on the LGBTQ community. It's already happening. So this process is already well established. It doesn't get reported a lot, but it's already happening. So that's already a second stage of Weimar. First stage, second stage. So we're second stage now, just if you want to go home and really bum out all your relatives. So meanwhile, you have in the 90s the armed militias that were sort of in between, partly right-wing populists, partly being drawn into this group. And of course, recently we had the Tea Party, which was 1 foot in the Republican Party and 1 foot in the right-wing populist movement. So it's all very complicated. So what historic moment are we looking at now? Why now? And the woman I worked for 30 years, Jean Hardesty, who founded Political Research Associated, said, well, we have historically significant white racial resentment and bigotry, conservative religious revitalization primarily within the Christian right, economic contraction and restructuring via free market neoliberalism, organized right-wing backlash movements reacting against calls for equality and fairness based on gender, race, and class, and a network of national, state, and grassroots right-wing organizations, many of which are funded by foundations and wealthy individuals who support quote-unquote free enterprise, but also the Christian right. The linkages among different sectors working in projects, an idea put forward first by sociologist Sarah Diamond, is very crucial to understand. The project method allows people on the right to set up a project to smash gay rights, but they might not agree on the free market side of things, so they'll do different stuff. Instead of running somebody out of a political movement because they're not involved in every single project, the right sets up projects where people can opt in or opt out. And then the next time, a few months later, they come in and decide which groups are going to opt in and opt out again. Now, right-wing populism has a producer's narrative. What are the producers? Well, depends who you ask. Who are the real producers in society? If you ask Mitt Romney, 44% of Americans are the takers, not the makers. That's the idea of producerism. There are producers and parasites. Producers make wealth, like Mitt does, and Trump does, and parasites take wealth. And who are the parasites? Well, let's see. They're lazy, they're sinful, or they're subversive, or all three. They tend to be people of color or immigrants from the wrong country. They are, it's this room. They're left-wingers and radicals and people who don't like the status quo. These are the lazy, sinful, and subversive parasites. That's us. So it's easy then to develop a narrative that says you're being pushed aside, white, working, and middle-class American. You're being pushed aside by undeserving people. And the reason the American dream has failed is not been the wholesale looting of the financial base of American economy by the 1%. It's because these lazy, sinful, subversive takers have drained the vitality of America, like precious bodily fluid. Oh, that's a film, really. So, where do we go? Well, let's take a look. After World War II, you would have thought that, genocide was in bad taste, at least. Overt racism, overt anti-Semitism was kind of off the table. Actually, what it wasn't published in the right-wing press anymore, but around the cocktail table, it was still quite vivid. But there was this idea of a bunch of right-wing organizers to rebuild the right-wing movement without the overt anti-Semitic and racist and white racist rhetoric. And they decided to build a coalition. Free market libertarians, anti-communists, which, listen when I say that, they mean anti-collectivism of all sorts. Any form of collectivism, big government, unions, it's all the same thing. And then moral traditionalists, the Christian right. Now, what does the Christian right bring to the table? Other than 300 years of overtly bizarre Calvinism. Well, that's what they brought to the table, because they brought Calvinism in the form of the idea that, which was not what Calvin said, it's not to, for those of you who study these things. In America, Calvinism was translated to mean, wrongly, that if you were wealthy, it was signed that you were one of the select, the elect, and you were going to heaven. Which meant that if you were living in America, you broke your ass trying to become wealthy, so you would be seen as one of the elect, which Weber wrote about in, Protestantism and the spirit of capitalism. The spirit of capitalism is self-abuse, obviously. You exploit yourself until you're, whatever. So, American creed and neo-Calvinist apocalyptic thinking. And that's another thing that you need to take seriously, because most mainstream journalists don't. About 4 or 5 years ago, polling in New Jersey found that around 13% of New Jersey Republicans thought Obama might be the Antichrist of the Book of Revelation and was selling out America to collectivism on behalf of Satan. Now, I have interviewed over 100 Christian evangelicals and have had a conversation with them where we talked for hours about this as reality. That I have heard people, I had people tell me, I am so excited to be alive when Christ is returning. It's any day now. That's apocalyptic thinking. Apocalyptic thinking, as you all know, ends badly. Except when it's apocalyptic thinking that doesn't take a tragic mode and is comedic and says, let's see if we can change things. I don't know if it'll work, but hey, what the heck. Versus anyone who disagrees with me is in league with Satan, and if I don't crush those people, I will be damned to hell forever as a Christian. If you take that stuff seriously, that's very powerful. motive to crush the opposition who's working for Satan, which, by the way, look to your left, look to your right, that's all of us. So, okay, moving on. So if neo-Calvinist idiocy isn't enough with free markets and anti-collectivism, there's a model. It's a great model. It's basically that elites, that there are good elites and bad elites. The bad elites are squeezing the real people from the top. Meanwhile, the lazy, sinful, and subversive parasites down below are squeezing the decent, pure, normal people from the bottom. So it's like a vice, okay? And so that then allows for Donald Trump to sneak in over here. Hi, I'm a right-wing populist. Let me. My brother went to military school with Donald Trump. He said he was a jerk then. So I'm on your side. I want to come up here and replace the bad elites with me. I'm a good elite. Trust me. So every time I use this right-wing populist rhetoric, forget the fact that I've been bankrupt. Oh, never mind. So the whole point is that one form that Margaret Canavan.
Take your time.
Oh, yes. Phew. Not much. Margaret Canavan said, look, this is a common way that elites have a faction fight. You know, you have elites, they don't always agree, they have different means of, dealing with what they want to do, and so you have an intra-elite squabble in which one group of elites decides to use right-wing populism to shoehorn the other elites out of power so that they can take power, which is what is happening now with Trump. It's a battle within elites, and Trump's taken the role of the person who's winding up the burger class. Oh, that was Weimar. Winding up the right-wing populists in America. So, functioning very nicely so far. Now, what are key elements of right-wing populism in case you haven't guessed? Oh, let's see. Prejudice and bigotry, scapegoating of another, demonization and denigration, fear of a subversive conspiracy, and apocalyptic calls for showdown between good and evil. Try saying apocalyptic millennialism in this speech. Okay, that's what we're seeing now in terms of the effect in populations that have been scapegoated. They are deemed as not just unworthy, but dangerous. They're against us, they're destroying the country, and whatever they get, they deserve. That's a very bad place to be in a society. Now, one of the things I'm told by editors a lot is that, rhetoric doesn't really cause any problems. And this is one of the excuses for Trump. Rhetoric is just rhetoric. Well, except if you actually have studied social science since Hannah Arendt. Hello? There is now over 50 years of social science documenting that rhetoric leads to violence. It is not a direct link. It is an indirect link. The demagogue says the Jews are destroying Germany, and a bunch of teenagers go out and stomp them or throw bricks through windows, right? So try and get the mainstream press now to deal with the fact that that is in fact social science. They reject it. They will not write articles saying this, except in the last couple months, you're starting to see people say this. There's a tremendous wealth coming out of Rwanda and Serbia-Croatia area. There's all sorts of evidence that it was radio that played the role in Africa and Eastern Europe to pit people against each other and get these movements that were essentially genocidal in motion. I'm going to leave some fun handouts here for people who like colorful things. But basically, how come the media has fallen for this? Well, because it sells underarm deodorant. Basically, you forget that the mass media, the product is the audience. It's kind of a modern mass media understanding. The media today, detached from any idea of journalistic integrity, will make any pronouncement, put anything on TV as long as it keeps eyeballs on the commercials. And they have almost no ability left to be self-reflective about what they're doing. with their coverage of Trump. The amount of coverage given to Trump in the early phases of this campaign dwarfed the amount of coverage given every other candidate. And people say, well, so what? Conspiracy theories. American is apple pie. Who settled? A little more. Who settled the country? The Pilgrims? Wait, let's back up. We're in an area now that was actually settled by native peoples from the Lenape people, the Delaware. And so it's good to mention that the real people and nativism is an interesting concept, right? Because we are now near a whole lot of areas named after the original nations, Indian nations, right here. So just pause and think about that. What was the conspiracy that the settlers brought to this nation? We're a settler nation. The settlers were convinced that England had become corrupt, and that with that corruption, it meant that Jesus would not return. Therefore, they came to the New World to set up the shining city on a hill, which is from the Bible, which was going to be a lamp of pure Christianity, so Christ would come back to the New Jerusalem, which we call Boston. This is, you go back and you read this stuff from the 1600s. This is really what it's all about. They, that the Indian people had no souls, so so what? They kill them, and that we needed to have a pure Christian society so that Jesus would come back, and the crossing of the water was the Atlantic now, right? Great. Now, of course, what did these people do if you were a dissident? They would kill you. They rolled stones on the witches. They had one poor woman kept trying to say, I'm a dissident, I won't talk that stuff. They finally killed her. She came back once too often. So here's a scapegoat timeline for the United States. I'm just going to mention it because I only have a couple minutes left. We have the Freemasons, the Catholics, the Jews, communists and anarchists, liberal internationalists, civil rights, secret kingmakers. Who wrote about the secret kingmakers? Oh, come on.
Secret kingmakers?
Yeah, Phil Schlafly. Choice Out and Echoes about the secret kingmakers, right? Oh boy. Feminist homosexuals, and on and on. So, we have a society that now has a multicolored view of who the bad people are, who are the real conspirators. And so you can go on some websites and radio stations and it's like lizard aliens, honestly, David Icke. But, just the Freemason Jewish Catholic conspiracy. I don't think so. Anyway, I'm going to end with basically the idea that behind this more than anything else is white nationalism and heteropatriarchy, and a divine sense of God's will is behind the American creed, and that scapegoats and conspiracism and the American dream are locked in a death spiral. The American dream was what a lot of people believed would make their children better off than they are. So many working people in the middle class and the upper lower class. These class distinctions are losing our ability to understand that some two-income union families are very up in the middle class. They do quite well, but they're all dropping, and they know their children aren't going to do as well, and they're pissed. Arlie Hochschild has a book coming out about the American dream being smashed and why so many of these people are angry and how no one is giving them any opportunity except the right-wing populists. So that's essentially where we end up. The dilemma now is the analysis of the 1990s is not sufficient for what's happening now. We've moved into a new phase, and we need new understandings to try and fight what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Chip, and now Bill Fletcher.
Good evening.
Good evening.
One of the, I appreciate very much being invited to do this, and one of the problems when you do an event at 7 o'clock, when you turn the lights down, I noticed that some people are starting to fade. I know I always say this, and I have to, I've been ordered to, I have to warn people that I become homicidal when people fall asleep in front of me. So, I just had to say that, I know it's on. So I've been obsessed with the right since I became radicalized. I was influenced by the Black Panther Party after reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. And I felt like the Panthers were the absolute legacy of Malcolm. And the Panthers talked a great deal about fascism and the fascist attacks and Nixon as a fascist, etc. And I wasn't quite comfortable with the analysis. I don't mean by that it made me nervous. It just, there was something that was missing. And as I became more of a Marxist, I started reading Georgy Dimitrov, who had been the head of the Communist International, and his historic speech to the 1935 Congress, 7th Congress of the Comintern, about fascism. And so for me, the right was sort of about fascism, and I couldn't quite figure out certain things about the state. And like many other people on the left in the US, I started to look at the issue of the right and fascism as synonymous, and that fascism basically was anything we didn't like. Any form of repression was fascism. The Chilean coup was fascist. The Brazilian coup was fascist. The Indonesian coup was fascist. Nixon's attacks on the Panthers were fascist. Anything that we didn't like was fascist. Any form of viciousness. And what I finally realized was that a lot of this is rooted in a complete misunderstanding of democratic capitalism that much of the left has. That we don't want to admit it, but we romanticize democratic capitalism. We actually think democratic capitalism is democratic. We actually think that democratic capitalism means that we're supposed to be following all of these laws and that things are supposed to be constitutional. And that there shouldn't be things like the concentration camps that was set up, not for the Japanese, but for the strikers in 1934 in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Tennessee, who were textile workers, they and their families were imprisoned in essentially detention camps, right? So that doesn't quite fit our analysis. That must be fascist, right? Or the repatriados, that is the expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Chicanos and Mexican Americans, right? Well, that can't happen. That must be fascist. And therefore, and there's this failure to understand the way racialized democratic capitalism works, that there's nothing particularly democratic about it, although it does follow certain rules and certain laws and must be distinguished from fascism. And I really want to emphasize this, that fascism, when we talk about fascism, and I'm not going to focus entirely on fascism, but I just feel that it's important to raise this. Fascism is not simply the instrument of the capitalists when they get pissed off, right? Which is in effect what many of us have actually believed. That it is when the capitalists get pissed off, when they are afraid of a rising movement, they call upon fascism. Think about the flyers that you've read and the different articles. They call upon fascism to emerge. And I think what we have to understand is that the political right, but specifically the fascists, are an independent social movement. And I would argue, in line with Chip's co-author, Matt Lyons, is that it actually, and Jay Sakai, is that actually it is a revolutionary movement. It is not a conservative movement. Metaphorically, fascism is about the burning of the underbrush within capitalism. It is about clearing out the deadwood in order for the construction of a different kind of capitalism, but a capitalism nevertheless. And in that sense, it's different from the counter-revolutionary revolts that we see at different times. It's different from Suharto's coup in Indonesia in '65. It serves a different purpose. It is not something that is simply manufactured by the ruling elite. The right-wing populism, of which fascism is a subset, I think that I would perhaps go further in some ways than Chip, but I have to say, before going there, that I owe an immense amount to Chip and Matt Lyons for their analysis in the book Right-Wing Populism in America. And if you have not gotten it, you have to get it. It's not one of these, you sit around and if you stumble across it sometime, it's good. No, you've got to get this book. To me, it actually, no, really. And I would say, and people that know me know that even if Chip is not sitting here, I'd say it, right? That it is a must-read and in many ways reads like a novel. And I would strongly encourage it. The other book I would strongly encourage is Nicholas Poulantzas, Fascism and Dictatorship. Right-wing populism is the herpes of capitalism. Right-wing populism exists within the body of capitalism. And it exists, as far as I can tell, in every capitalist society. But that it appears when the body weakens. But it manifests itself in different ways. That there are nationally specific forms of right-wing populism. And this is something that when I wrote the piece for Socialist Register, and I was doing some research for it, and I found it very interesting that right-wing populism is never the same. What you see in Rwanda is very different than what you might see in Algeria. What you see in Holland is different from what you'd see in France. That it's not the same thing. There's no cookie cutter. That each form of right-wing populism, although there's certain consistencies, each form has its own national specificity. And part of what we have to do in the United States is understand that the emergence of right-wing populism, it's not going to look like exactly what the Le Pen movement in France or the extreme form Nazism in Germany. That it's going to look differently, and that you have to understand the histories, the religion, the culture of a country in order to understand the forms of right-wing populism. And for the United States, one of the points that Chip is making is central, that this is a settler racial state, that the form of right-wing populism here cannot be understood outside of that. That if you pretend that this is some abstract capitalist country, as opposed to a settler racial capitalist, your analysis and strategy will completely go down the tubes. That the notion that this country is very much founded on was this which gives the right-wing populists an advantage over us on the left, is that the right-wing populists, their narrative is a version of the origin myth of the United States, which is paraphrasing what Chip was reading. Whereas we are encumbered by the truth, right-wing populists are not. And they take to an extreme something that's very fundamental in the United States, which is that we don't believe in history in the United States. We believe in myth. And what the right-wing populists do is that they take that and they develop a very comprehensive, easily understood myth of the development of society. And when the body weakens, this right-wing populism in various forms emerges. And in different eras you see things. And depending on the nature of the weakening, there's different kinds of manifestations of right-wing populism. So for example, one of the things that I've noticed when you look at history is that when there is a financial crisis, right-wing populism seems to take on a particularly anti-Semitic form, as opposed to when there's generic economic crises. When there's a financial crisis, and this is not just true in the United States, the right-wing populists go Jew hunting. They are looking to identify the Jew. And I'm using that term in quotes, right? They're looking to figure out which Jew is behind this particular financial crisis. And that's different than in other economic downturns. But we saw this, we saw this in the 1980s, not on the East Coast or on the West Coast, but where? In the Midwest, in the middle of a financial crisis that was particularly afflicting farmers. And what happens? The form of right-wing populism and neo-fascism that emerges is virulently anti-Semitic, right? So we have to understand the way that these different things emerge over time and the national specificity. So far, let me just sum up so far. So one is that democratic capitalism is not particularly democratic. It is very vicious. It is vicious even when it is going by the general rules and laws. The difference with fascism is that fascism is not constrained by the law. Fascism is completely barbaric and criminal. And an interesting example, how many of you saw the Kenneth Branagh film Conspiracy? Oh my God. No, okay, we gotta stop this. And somebody has got to go get that, and we watched it for the rest of it. No, this is, I said that was a must read. This is a must see. This was 2001. It is a film about the Wannsee meeting. Right? When the Wannsee meeting, which took place in 1942 in Germany, to plan the final solution. And the chair of the meeting was Reinhard Heydrich, right? And the movie is called Conspiracy, and it's based on documents that were supposed to have been destroyed by, who was the aide to Heinrich, who the Israelis caught in Argentina. Eichmann was supposed to destroy this, but he was so anal, he kept this, and they were able to basically produce this film based on transcripts of the Wannsee meeting. You've got to see this. Because one of the things that's fascinating in watching this is that they've come to a point where they basically decide we can no longer be constrained by the 1935 Nuremberg decrees. That those laws, which were envisioned by certain people as laws, those are constraining the operation of the fascist state, and that the time had come. And they basically say, how many people in the room are lawyers? And most of them raise their hands, and they say, we create the laws that we need, right? So there's a criminality and arbitrariness that you see in the operation of fascism. They don't even pretend at a certain point to be restricted by the law. Whereas within democratic capitalism, there's supposed to be laws, and those laws in part are aimed at trying to resolve contradictions within the capitalist class. Contradictions in a non-violent way, as opposed to contradictions between the capitalist class and people. So we've got to understand this important distinction between democratic capitalism and fascism. So, and the second thing is the issue of national specificity. And the third thing is, and I don't know whether I'm running out of time.
You're just at 15 minutes, you have 25.
Okay, cool. So the third thing is that I would argue that the nationally specific form of right-wing populism in the United States is neo-Confederate. Now, when I say neo-Confederate, I don't mean the guys that wear these Confederate uniforms or people that basically believe Lee was correct and we've got to defend these statues and things like that. I mean something broader, and this is with all due respect to Chip, because in the book that he and Alliance put together, they talk about the neo-Confederates, but in looking at the politics, I'm talking about the politics, there's certain interesting themes that run throughout U.S. right-wing populism. For example, nullification. I don't know of any other country where right-wing populism has nullification as a central component. But nullification goes back pre-Civil War, right? The whole notion of states' rights and the ability to put restrictions on what the federal government does, right? This issue of nullification. And we've been seeing the reemergence of nullification. Every so often you'll see it pop up. It was going up in the, as the civil rights movement was increasing in strength. the state's writers, nullify, right? Well, we're seeing it again, right? With what? Right. We're seeing it with Obamacare, and we're seeing it with gay rights, etc. Right? This whole issue of nullification. We see it also with an interesting thing, the deconstruction of political parties. I don't know how many of you know, in the Confederate States of America, political parties were banned. Yeah, interesting, right? That they were banned. And there was this mythical notion that by eliminating political parties, that there was a greater sense of accountability, right? But accountability between who? Between the political leaders and the people. Who the people? Well, they're white people, right? And so you had this mythological notion that you could get away from bureaucracy, et cetera, by essentially banning political parties. Well, obviously the issue of white supremacy and the codification of a white republic, that right-wing populism, when it emerges at different points, very central to it is the notion that the United States is a white republic and the rest of us are guests,
Right.
wanted or unwanted, but nevertheless guests. Right? And so this notion of the white republic. So when we hear Trump talking about taking back America, which is the term that used to drive me crazy when liberals would say it under Bush. But no, really, I hear these liberals say, I never had America. Take it back. Right? But when Trump is talking about that, they're not just meaning take it back from the Democrats. He is very consistent with this theme that runs throughout the history of right-wing populism, that this is a white republic and that it has been stolen, it has been ripped off. And the form of that, the personification of this, obviously, is Barack Obama. Now, there is a theocratic wing that to right-wing populism that Chip mentions that doesn't quite fit into the neo-Confederate characterization. And I'm not going to try to squeeze it in. I'm just going to say, as they say in the Matrix, this is like a variable that is a remainder, right? I can't work out the equation. But there is this theocratic element that is very, very important. And you guys talk about the dominionists. There's a whole wing of these right-wing theocrats that cruise personifying the political arena, but I'm not going to go into that right now. All right, so what can be done? Well, let me start with what should not be done. What should not be done is the notion that the worse things get, the better they will be for the left.
Oh, yeah.
Right? That somehow that people like Trump, and listen, I hear it, I'm not going to mention names. I was reading something in a book that I happen to have in my lap by an author who lives in New York, but I'm not going to mention the person's name. And it was really interesting because what they were basically arguing is that many of us are too afraid that we fall prey to Democratic Party liberalism because some Democratic leaders will hold out the threat of the brown shirts. That is the threat of fascists. If you don't vote for us, the real dangerous right will get in. And I realized when I read this that he's right. I am damn sure afraid of the brown shirts. I'm not just afraid of the brown shirts, I'm afraid of the silver shirts, right? I'm afraid of people that have no shirts. I'm afraid of people that are wearing ties, right? And other kinds of shirts. That these movements this is not just an ideological question. As Chip was pointing out, we're dealing with people who are prepared to use not simply spontaneous violence, but we're dealing with people who are very well armed. And when I say very well armed, I do not mean shotguns and Winchester repeaters. I mean Kalashnikovs. I mean RPGs, right? I mean that 50 caliber machine guns. People that believe when Chip is talking about Armageddon, there's a segment of the right that believes that the Armageddon is a racial civil war Armageddon, and we must prepare. So the worse things get, the worse things will get. The slogan of the Communist Party in 1932, the Communist Party in Germany, was after Hitler, us. And only in a certain relative sense did that happen, right? In 1945 when Germany was divided, right? Only in that sense. But that's not what Thalman and the leadership of the KPD thought was going to happen in 1932. They thought that Hitler would expose himself as the fraud that he was and that the KPD could march in. So that's an assumption that unfortunately many people make now. And I hear it when people talk about, well, if Trump gets elected, it won't be that bad.
For whom?
Right, exactly. For whom? Right? So that's in the arena of what we shouldn't do. What we should do. There's two things. One is that we're seeing out there elements of what I would call mass left radicalism. And it's incredibly exciting. And this is not something that's just emerged with the Sanders campaign. There was a very interesting opinion poll several years ago, and I first heard about it through Bill O'Reilly, not known for being a Bolshevik. And it was interesting, right? Because Bill O'Reilly he was saying that this poll indicated that 7 out of 10 Americans believed in capitalism. But that's really interesting, because that means 3 out of 10 don't. And if 3 out of 10 in a country of more than 300 million people don't believe in capitalism, that's a hell of a lot of people. And what we have been seeing over the last several years is that this 3 out of 10, and when you're dealing with people under 30, it's a more significant proportion, who have very significant questions at a minimum about capitalism as a system. That does not mean that they have a coherent view. It means that there's something out there about the way that current capitalism as we understand it is operating, actually existing capitalism is operating, that they are prepared to fight around. And we've seen manifestations of that through Occupy, through the movement for Black Lives, through the Sanders campaign. This force must become more self-aware, must become coherent, must become organized. It cannot rely on great individuals, nor can we have the illusion that it will result in, that any of this will result in just one organization. There are going to be a proliferation of organizations. We're going to have to bring these together. This will be essential in fighting the right, because part of what we have to do is demonstrate that capitalism, we have to demonstrate to some of the base that's attracted to right-wing populism, that there really is an alternative, that their lives are in fact just collapsing, and that there is a left alternative to this. The second thing is that we have to be proponents of a broad front to defeat the right. And for many people on the left, this is something that where we start breaking out in hives. We start becoming that's going to turn us all into liberals, and then we start arguing about whether the popular front was a good thing or a bad thing. We have to recognize that we need, at any one moment, you need to have more friends than enemies.
Right.
And that this is a very critical moment where the people in the middle cannot be allowed to remain in the middle and passive. That when they're in the middle, they are going to be subject to the various winds that are buffeting them. And there's a very heavy wind coming out of the right that can be very convincing, very awe-inspiring. And that if we are not able to influence that middle, then we are toast. Thank you.
Okay, the forum's been really good so far. The speakers have been great. And your contribution at the door helped to defray the expenses for tonight. Take care of it. But BFP doesn't just do forums. We're out there day in and day out working against war and for a whole range of progressive causes. And the corollary to that is that while our work is ongoing, so are our expenses. And you can help with this beyond what you gave at the door, which is much appreciated. 3 ways I can think of. One is join Brooklyn for Peace. It's $30 a year, not a great deal, but it does help us with our work through throughout the year. The anti-militarism that we do in the schools, the tabling that we do, the demonstrations that we organize and participate in, and forums like this. The literature that we generate. One second way is, in this very space, next month, there's going to be a benefit for VFP. It's going to be a one-man play, which is witty and funny and important. It's called The Third Coming, Marx Returns. It'll be here on June 18th. There are flyers here on the lit table, which is the third way that you can help, is come over to the lit table, pick up a button, make a contribution, an extra $1 or $2. Pick up a copy of the book, and if you enjoy, no, I think enjoy is the wrong word. If you appreciate, that's a good word. If you appreciate, if you are moved by the stuff that you've heard tonight, the book is, all Bill was talking about right-wing populism being an essential read. This is very, very good. It's what's happening right now all around the world, and Bill was talking about this specificity of the right-wing movements around the world. And a number of these articles get into that. They talk about the specific right-wing movement in India. They talk about the specific right-wing movement in Brazil. They talk about the specific right-wing movement in Japan and Israel, and on and on and on. And they're all different, and they're terrifying and fascinating, and we need to know about them. The book's here at a discount. So anyway, please, we're so glad that you came. We're so glad that you're part of this, and that you're going to have questions and contributions to make in just a minute. But if you could also make a contribution in terms of one of these other ways that you can help us financially, it would be much appreciated. So thank you.
So thanks, Gary, and I do recommend people buy that wonderful book. As my sister, another inveterate shopper, I hate to sound capitalistic, but she gave me this funny birthday card that said, "There is a mathematical formula for happiness, 50% off." So now we want to have some dialogue, and I ask people to try and be concise so we can get in as many voices, honor the voices of people of color and women who have been historically silenced.
This was phenomenal, and I so appreciate Brooklyn for Peace bringing you guys here to my own borough. This is great, and especially talking about strategy, what do we do, and Chip ending, asking what's different, and let me share a question, things to put into the hopper. When I was writing about the Sarah Palin phenomenon, and this is even pre-Tea Party, right? So there's this moment, and Sarah Palin had these high-profile feminists from the Los Angeles National Organization for Women chapter who supported her. I don't know if you remember that. And I was writing about right-wing women and right-wing feminism, and I was really struggling with how they were right-wing, right? And they were white supremacist, really. That's what they were. And so how did I think about these white supremacists within this model of the right, where they were not free marketers, they weren't even states' rightsers, you know, I mean, they jumbled it up in a way, and of course,
What's the question?
Oh, well, this is my question for Chip and Bill, who are trying to think about what's different here, and I'm asking, is what part of it is kind of brute white supremacy within this, and like the Democratic Party not being as friendly a home for it, and then latching onto it. I mean, like, that was just something that I observed. And the second question I had was about empire. We have a real estate mogul who is leading the Republican Party. What does that mean for the view of what's going on with American empire? Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry for being so
I
long.
think Mitch was next, I believe.
So I appreciate where Bill ended is where I think we should have begun. Bill posed two things. One, that we need to appeal to some of the base of the right wing now. And the second part was we must have a broad front to influence the middle. Okay, how? How do we do it differently? And for me, it seems that the left is stuck in a way that just repeats the same errors of the past and isn't learning, including the left's intervention. I'm using the left generically, maybe I shouldn't, but Occupy was, I thought, a wonderful new way in which people began organizing that was then almost disrupted by the organized left because they didn't appreciate what was different about Occupy. And I think that that's important to talk about. How do we do it differently? I also, in terms of Chip, he focused on the Republican Party, the right-wing Republicans. It's true there's a difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. And if you live in Libya or elsewhere, you hate Hillary Clinton. Her role there has been horrible, just murderous. And if you believe anything that Trump says, he's opposed. I don't believe anything he says. I think he's coming at the spur of the moment, whatever comes to his head. But he opposed that. So he says, withdraw from Afghanistan and Iraq. Hillary says, go in further, create more wars. So I don't really see. If you could play that out, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay. The next person is John.
I remember a time when a lot of us came up that a lot of us quickly went from being, we believed what we were taught in the society, we believed what we were taught in school, churches, and a lot of us were very much with the American flag and the American way of living. Then the Civil Rights Movement happened, the Vietnam War, and the repression of the black movement. All this happened, and it made us question a certain amount of years that a lot of us grew up. We quickly turned. And now I seen that, to me, I seen this seems to be happening again in the next generation. And the next generation, a lot of them were taught by people of us, people of our generation taught these people. And but I think people of our generation taught them to question it. And so these people questioned when the Iraq War happened. These people questioned when Wall Street happened, and they joined the Occupy movement. And now we have Black Lives Matter movement. Now we have the Sanders movement, and we have people that will go, the young people that will go and disrupt Trump's rallies. So this is a great thing that's been happening. And how can we build off this? I guess that's the question.
How do we build off it? Okay, and the last person in this round was the gentleman back there with the hat.
There is a question that has always been troubling me about the working poor and the unemployed. I can understand the nativists and the white supremacists or right-wing evangelicals and so on gravitating to the right-wing populists like that. But I cannot understand for the life of me how the workers can be supporting someone, let's say, like a Trump, or as they did, for example, during Reagan, hard hats and all, Could it be that organized labor has not been able to adequately inform and organize? And if so, if the current labor, as it is constituted now, cannot do that, perhaps Bill might explain this. You started about what should be done. Perhaps you can expound on that a little bit more, how to organize workers.
Thank you.
Well, I've been doing a lot of research on the patriot and militia movement in Oregon, and I'm a cranky New Yorker, so sometimes I start engaging with them, and they always want to argue about the Constitution. I could tell you a lot about arguments between anarchists and the Freedom Road organization in the 90s before I could tell you anything about arguments about the Constitution. What should people on the left say and do with these arguments. Should we defend the Constitution? Do we want to take a certain stance about how the Constitution should be interpreted? This just isn't a discussion on the left, but it is a very useful way that people on the right can engage with and recruit people by initiating discussions about it and putting their interpretation of it to people that they're trying to recruit, and how should we respond to that?
Okay, so we'll give a lot of panelists a chance to respond now. Just a couple little bits.
As Rachel mentioned, is white supremacy the main contradiction here? Absolutely. I think that you also get gender issues, but ultimately, if you're going to say who supports Trump, it's white people. That's the single biggest group, but it's white people across all income levels. There is a myth that this is working class people or, and let's be clear that the original fascist movement had two areas where there was support. There were the lumpen proletariat, but there were also the burger class. And so it was the burger class, the petty bourgeois, that you often have this two-sector support. And you're getting that now. There are a lot of people who are very discarded people in America who support Trump just because they're tired of it. But there's a very large group of middle-class people. But all across the income levels up to about $180,000 a year, $200,000 a year, there is a sense of downward mobility in each of the income level segments. And all of these segments are showing support for Trump, significantly so if you're a white person, and significantly so if you're male. So that's the reality of it. But I think basically it's white people. I know. And we're running out of white people. And that's part of the fear of us white people, is that we're running out of white people. We can't create any more white people. Jews are sort of white people now. Poles didn't used to be white people, they are now. Italians, the Irish weren't white. So, the problem is, what do you do in society when you're running out of white people? And, Trump's the answer. Anyway, broad front. I honestly think we need to build a broad front on the local level to defend everyone under attack and make it local. Build neighborhood and citywide small town coalitions built around the idea that the attack on one is the attack on all. And you're starting to see this spontaneously around the world with attack on Muslims, where you're just getting people coming together saying that's not acceptable. So that's what I think it should be. I think it's much more powerful on the local level. And I believe that movements start on the local level and build bridges across geographic areas and create movement. So movements need grassroots base. Leadership never comes from the top. Leadership comes up from the bottom and proves themselves, and people then trust the leaders that come up from the bottom. Anyway, that's my view. Why did the working poor and unemployed support Reagan and Trump? Because of the myth of American supremacy around the world, that we were undefeatable, that you went to war and defended the American way of life, and you went with your friends from high school. And I don't think folks understand how much of war was fought by cohorts of young men in cities and towns, farm areas, who went to war as a group and defended each other's, had each other's back, had each other's six, as they say, which means 6 o'clock behind you so your back is covered. That a lot of this had to do with what it meant to be a man in America, including going to war and defending your band of brothers. Just saying. And Constitution, it's like modernity. It's not the end-all of philosophy, but I hate to be pushed back behind it. So the Constitution, Constitution is not enforced. It's not the best document, but I'd rather have one than not have one. So is the Constitution flawed? Yes. We need to defend the Constitution as an unfinished product, that it's never been real for most Americans, but it would be better if it was, and it would be worse without it. Let's talk about that at the bar, at the supermarket checkout line. I have taught myself to have conversations on buses, waiting for the subway. In the barbershop, I go to right-wing barbershops and say, what about that Trump? And I listen for an hour. You'd be amazed what you hear. Anyway, learn to talk to people. People are people. You organize by talking to people. If you don't talk to people, you're not an organizer.
I want to pick up on this issue of the Constitution. It's an interesting question. Because part of it is related to narrative. And there's a specific issue in the right that I'm sure you're familiar with. It's not just about the Constitution, it's about what part of the Constitution is legitimate. Right? And there's a segment of the right that basically argues that the first 10 amendments, and that's it. Right? And that everything else, and they have this whole rationale. Again, it's almost like flying saucers and stuff like that. They have this whole rationale as to why the other amendments are not legitimate. So the argument around the Constitution is actually not an argument just around the Constitution. It's actually whether we're talking about the entirety of it, which actually leads us into an interesting discussion about the struggle for consistent democracy, which is what we should be representing, and which is what they don't. They are fighting for the democracy of a white republic. We are fighting for a consistent democracy, and as such, in agreement with Chip, enforce and expand the Constitution. Now, there's something else that I think we have to keep in mind, which is why electoral politics is far more important than many of us think. How many of you are aware of the efforts to call a constitutional convention? Okay, so for those of you that are not, get ready to get scared, right? There has been an effort for a number of years to sign up enough states, I think that there are about 6 to 8 states away from being able to pull it off, to call a constitutional convention, right? Now, if this was 1969, maybe some of us would say, yeah, let's go for it, right? But this isn't 69, right? And what they want to do in a constitutional convention is, in fact, to change the Constitution, right? To basically introduce a flat tax, to eliminate the right to organize. I mean, a whole series of things. So while we sit back and talk about Tweedledee, Tweedledum, the right laughs because as they move each state legislature more and more into the Republican camp, the ability, the opportunity to call a convention increases. Right? So when they talk about the Constitution, you know, it's, let's say they speak with forked tongue. The issue of empire is very interesting. One of the things about right-wing populism in the global north is that it's affected, it seems to be affected by two things, and these seem to transcend borders. One is the emergence of global capitalism and a transnational capitalist class, and the altering role of the state. So that very central to right-wing populists, neo-fascists as well as others, is the notion of the reaffirmation of the nation state and the identification of the nation state with a dominant ethnic group.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's not just we want a French state for anybody who happens to be here. No, they want a French state along the lines of the French state that Marshal Pétain had from 1940 to 1944, the Vichy Republic, right? They want that kind of state, right? So what we have to understand is that there is, that the right-wing populists are appealing to a fear among segments of the population about the loss of control. However, the deeper fear is related to what Etienne Balabar wrote about 20 years ago, about talking about neo-racism, which is this fear that, and this is a post-colonial fear, the fear that's happening with the changing demographics in the United States, in Germany, in France, in Switzerland, the changing demographics, And neo-racism is particularly interesting, and this is why you can have these idiots on television saying, "I'm not a racist," you know, because when they're talking, when the right wing is talking about what they're talking about now, that comes out as a big neo-racism, is that they're talking about the incompatibility of peoples, as opposed to the superiority and inferiority. Now, implicit in the incompatibility is the issue of inferiority, superiority, but that's not the leading edge of this. It's that all these Syrian Muslims are coming into France. We don't have any way to absorb them. They won't become assimilated, right? Or what we hear in the United States, along similar lines. So this neo-racism fuses with current right-wing populism. It appears to be racially blind, but it is far from it. Right? So that's the other element of the contemporary right-wing populism that relates directly to the transformation of capitalism. The issue of Trump and Hillary. I had this debate. Well, I have a radio show. It's a little plug. And on Fridays on the Pacifica affiliate. And we were interviewing Ralph Nader. And his argument was, Sanders, Bernie or bust. Right? And he was laying out his critique of Hillary and everything. So at a certain point I said, so Ralph, you're basically saying there's no difference between Hillary and Trump. He says, well, no, of course there's a difference. You know, there's a difference on civil rights and there's difference on certain constitutional things, but on important issues. And he says, well, we can't be complicit. So in my meek way, I said, well, Ralph, some people would view civil rights as important. And at that point, he started doing a dance that paralleled Fred Astaire. I mean, it was absolutely amazing, right? I mean, he danced around that. And there are too many comrades on the left that fall into that exactly that, right? We know who Hillary is. She's a neoliberal, right? We know that for whatever set of reasons, she's an advocate of humanitarian imperialism. We know that. Okay. Now, who do we want appointing the next two Supreme Court justices? I'm just saying. If you're saying that it really doesn't matter, that Trump, Hillary won't matter, then I want you to get up and say it. And stop hiding behind these different things about Hillary and foreign policy. Say it won't matter who's appointed in the Supreme Court. Just say it. Right? If you want it, if you say that it won't matter on issues of voting rights and voter suppression, then damn it, get up and say it. Stop hiding. Right? Stop hiding. We don't need these. I mean, we all know where she's coming from. The question is, what are we going to do, and why is it that every time a liberal gets elected, even the ultra-leftists demobilize? All they seem to know how to do is to just throw rhetoric around. And maybe, if your answer, call a demonstration in Washington, right? But we have no practical line about what to do. So what should we do? You asked, you got me now. What we should do. We have to be engaged. If we're going to fight the right, we have to be engaged in a fight for power. It cannot be defensive or defensive alone. We have to do precisely what Chip is saying in terms of defending, and I mean by any means necessary when people are attacked. Right? That we have to defend them. When gays and lesbians are attacked, the right wing does not expect us to fight back. And every time we fight back, we chump them. Every time. They always run and cower as cowards. Because they don't expect the left to fight back. We have to fight back. Right? But the other thing that we have to do is we have to be engaged in a fight for power. We have to be building movements, and we have to be engaged in electoral challenges, not simply running the flag up to see who salutes and who agrees with our program, but actually fighting to take over this state and that state and this state. You know, I wrote this piece in Alternate a few weeks ago, and I was talking about this discussion I had in Texas. And I was there last year and giving a talk, and people were complaining, Texas is so backward, and this, and it's like I just wanted to hand out the Kool-Aid, right, and get on a plane. And so at a certain point I just said, so how do we take over Texas? And there was like silence. And I know some people thought, wow, he must have really been smoking a great joint. Because what is he talking about? I said, no, listen. You know, how do we take it over? I mean, either we're thinking at that level of strategy, or we should all move to New York, right? Because if we're not thinking about how do we take over Texas, then we are essentially conceding most of this country to the right. How do we, looking at the major metropolitan areas of Texas, who are the social movements, right? What forces are engaged? What kind of alliances need to be built? If we win in Dallas and San Antonio and Houston, what impact does that have on the rest of Texas? See, these are the kinds of discussions that we have to have. This is the anti-right thing that I'm talking about. That is not just the left operating by itself, and not just the left articulating our hatred for Trump, Cruz, and all these other idiots, right? It's about that we are interested in winning. And I actually don't believe that huge sections of the left are particularly interested in winning. I think that we've actually given up, that we don't think we can win. That at best we can fight a good, heroic, defensive battle. And I think in looking at the opposition to the right over the years, if we are not engaged in that real battle to win, they will. Yeah.
And I see you have your hand up. You'll be first. Does anybody else at this point want to speak? And you, and you, and you. Okay. All right. So
Please speak right into the mic.
One thing I'm concerned about is, and I don't think this is rhetorical, it's really what's happening, is this talk about taking over the right.
You have to have an intimate relationship with the microphone. Hold it right up.
I'm not concerned. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. No, my friends can never hear me. So this thing about, I'm concerned with the language of taking over the right and this issue of the danger of Trump. Look, Obama has deported more people than any other president. He's prosecuted more whistleblowers. He's the king, he's the ambassador of drones. Muslims are being surveilled and horrible things are happening to Muslims under the Obama administration. So I think we need to use a different language as opposed to, yes, we need to organize, but it's not just against the right. It's also, I find, the Democratic Party uses a softer rhetoric, but does some very similar things. And we know about under the Clinton administration, the 1994 crime bill, and the increase of mass incarceration, and all these horrible things. So I think we need to stop talking about taking over the right and building, and talking about, talking about it in a different way.
okay, thank you. Now, who is this? I know there's you, but who was the second person? Was it you? Yeah, I think it was you. Okay, go ahead. Speak right into the mic.
Many or most of us know that the Koch's father had dealings with the Nazis, and many or most of us know that Trump's name was originally Drumpf. All I know about his father is that Woody Guthrie was a tenant and Woody hated him, and I have no idea when the name was changed. The question is, do you think that what we detest about these guys has any roots in their ethnic heritage at all, or is it totally unrelated to that, to being Germanic?
From WBA upstairs, I have a copy upstairs. 2004, which was an anti-celebration of the passing of the Patriot Act. Cooper Union this was, 1,000 people or more, lines around the block, you couldn't get in. Solomon Rushdie was one of the speakers. Now, you were talking about the Constitutional Convention. And I see here the Trans-Pacific Partnerships. For that to go through, I mean, it's a direct violation of the Constitution. So they would have to modify the Constitution to make that fit. By the way, the TPP, it's thousands of pages. It weighs 30 pounds. Who could read it? But that's why they wanted to fast track it. And so far, it's in limbo. It's sort of up for passing or not. Now, you see, with the environmental issues, there's a coming together full circle of many, many different issues that are coming. I wonder if you could deal with that, comment on that.
Can you stop at 3 questions? All the questions get lost, I thought. Can you get start answering?
Yeah, they pretty much covered what was asked. There's just one more right now.
No, they didn't. They didn't cover the labor issue.
We'll go back, yeah, that's the one. We'll go back to that. Okay, just take Jackie's though. We'll go back to, we'll add the labor this time and then that's it.
I'd love to get into the more general and profound kind of issues that Bill raised about strategy, but I'm chomping at the bit. I want to do something now. You talked about mass radicalism. I was very involved in Occupy. I helped start it. I created the Alliance with 40 labor unions, and we squandered a terrific opportunity. I don't want to see us squander the opportunities that the Sanders campaign is providing. And I hope you have some ideas of where I can go tomorrow to hook into people who don't want to squander it. But anyway, I agree with you that there's a big shift to the left. If there's one poll in which it's 47% of young people prefer socialism to capitalism, I can't believe it. I just can't believe it. The kids at Occupy consider themselves the precariat. The surveys were done by some CUNY professors, 2 of them, and what they found out was that these were kids with good educations from middle-class households whose standard of living was going down. They had part-time jobs, they had 3 part-time jobs, they had no job. There is a weakening and a crisis of capitalism, and it is producing both a left and a right. The problem with Occupy, and it breaks my heart, is that there was no ongoing vehicle that came out of it. It was partly the anarchist ideology, which was just part of an expression of, decades of anti-communism since the Cold War that made them not trust anything on the left, and inexperience, and the fact that the left basically were abdicated. The left abdicated related to Occupy. The only organized left in Occupy was my labor group.
Question.
Yes. Okay. I want to know where the vehicle is that will come out of the Sanders campaign. Is the only thing? I know a lot of people are talking about going to Philadelphia. There's a People's Summit. I want to know what else is going on. Is there anything besides just maneuvering in the convention with what I think, maybe you disagree, is a long-held delusion of creating a left in the Democratic Party? I mean, it's different to use the electoral. It's another thing to think you can take over that corporate party, and I'm afraid that's the only vehicle that is being offered. So I want to know what is to be done now before this Sanders movement completely dissipates.
What is to be done?
Yeah, what is to be done, I recognize that. Okay, I'll wait till you're done. Okay. Obama is wretched, Hillary is wretched, I get it. It's all true. There's wretched and wretched. Trump would be more wretched than Hillary. It's a hold-your-nose situation. And if you don't believe that, I'm going to tell a story that ties in with Wannsee, which is that Hungary was fascist in 1945. Admiral Horthy ran it. He refused to send Jews to the death camps when the Germans demanded it. There was a Nazi coup. The Arrow Cross took over, And then Eichmann arrived and shipped the Jews to the death camps. So in this case, the fascist was better than the Nazi. So this is a real example. This is the kind of stuff we're looking at now. We have to say, you know, Horthy government, better. Nazi government, bad, much worse. And in case you think this doesn't come up to today, when Eichmann came in, the person who was working for the Hungarian detachment in Berlin was a Laszlo Pastor, who became a leader in the Free Congress Foundation started by Paul Weyrich with the help of the Koch brothers. And one of my jobs as a tracker was to track Laszlo Pastor when he was invited to the White House under Reagan for a meeting. He was a Nazi collaborator. There were over 50 Nazi collaborators in the Republican campaign committee for ethnics. Sometimes these choices are absurd. To say that in 1943 supporting the Horthy government was something a leftist should do for fear that the neo-Nazi Arrow Cross would take over and liquidate all the enemies was something that the left in Hungary had to think about. So I'm saying these are not easy choices, but they're not choices we should walk away from. I don't think the Germanic ethno-nationalist roots of people we despise have anything to do with anything. I think they're jerks, they're rapacious, and we don't like them for lots of reasons, not because they're German. And you know, this whole thing about how the Germans had a particular type of mentality can be taken to real ethnocentric extremes way too often. Just saying. I can leave the neo-Confederate nullification stuff to Bill. I don't know. I mean, most of my work has been in neighborhood organizing and working with labor unions. I was a shop steward. I helped start the labor union inside the Lawyers Guild because nothing can screw staff like a left-wing labor attorney. So, you know, my experience is limited to knowing that you can make substantial change with an organized labor on the local and even on the regional level. I think that having interviewed a bunch of people involved in labor organizing for an article I was working on, the fact that organized labor walked away from political education when the right started to rise in the 80s. I was actually brought in to speak to the board of the National Education Association, I mean the board, and I said, if you do not launch a campaign to defend yourself from right-wing attacks, your own constituents are going to start to bad rap you based on what they're being told every Sunday in church and listening to right-wing radio, and their decision was to do nothing. So labor needs to get involved in a political campaign for power.
So, see, I think that unfortunately many of us on the left look at electoral politics as popularity tests. You know, sort of like, who do we like the most and who do we like the least? And, you know, they don't have our program or they're actually bad or whatever. So, I've been a leftist for a long time. I don't need to be educated on who Hillary Clinton is, what she's done. You don't need to waste your time. You don't need to tell me how the Democratic Party has screwed up this and screwed up that. I'm a historian, I know a little bit about that. But what's interesting to really look at is what is the significance of different kinds of victories. In other words, with the victory of the Trump, you know, so I've heard more than once that Trump is to the left of Hillary on certain things. Well, Hitler was to the left of the Social Democrats on certain things. No, it's really important, and this relates to the labor thing. The swastika, the banner of the Nazis, right, was not red and black by accident. The red background of the Nazi flag was part of the appeal to the revolutionary elements of the working class and the petty bourgeoisie. This was not accidental. right? The language, there was the Otto and Gregor Stresser, the brothers, right? Who had a very specific task of organizing the working class to support the NSDAP, right? That was their job, right? And they had a left-wing message. So maybe we should have voted for Nazis, because they were better than the social fascists. Oops. Oh, wait. Somebody said that, right? And so we've got to, this is not about what someone's program is in abstract. It's about the concrete ramifications of an election, right? So, for example, what does it mean to elect somebody who authorizes mob violence? Well, for you white people, you may not be aware of this, right? But there's many of us of color that are slightly familiar with the authorization of violence, whether it's in the Southwest or in the South, when you had elected leaders who authorized violence and tolerated it, if not encouraged it. Does it make a difference if someone was elected that authorized violence or not? Ah, Tweedledee, Tweedledum, right? It doesn't matter. They're all capitalists. They're all pigs. The hell with them. Let's just sit home. Not quite. There's a real world ramification. And that was my point to Ralph Nader. This is not an abstraction. This is not about moral purity. This is about politics and power, and unfortunately right now the people's movement doesn't have it. We are not in a position to swamp all these swine aside and march forward into victory. We are dealing with circumstances that we did not create. And the question is, what do we do under those circumstances? It's not just an abstraction. See, that's why I don't have, with all due respect, I don't have a lot of tolerance for some of this. Because there's real implications. The election of a Cruz, when you have idiots running around in the Southwest saying that, well, maybe we shouldn't teach evolution. Right? Well, actually, right now we have people saying we shouldn't teach about the Mexican-American War. We shouldn't teach about Chicano history. So let's think, in terms of the candidates running, who do you think is more likely to say, yeah, in New Mexico, if you want to basically ignore the fact that northern Mexico was ripped off by the United States, that's okay. Go for it. It's well within your rights. Right? I mean, look, we got to be very real. Who is authorizing violence? And who is saying to their movement and saying to others that, you know, my support is they get out of control? I know damn well if a black person is running for office and their supporters got out of control, there would be hell to pay. So it actually does make a difference. And so we're operating within capitalism. We're operating within a capitalist system we don't particularly like. We know how it operates. We know it's vicious. We're operating within a capitalist system that's part of a global thing, which goes to my next point, that what has happened over the last 30 years is a transformation of global capitalism and the readjustment, as I was trying to raise earlier, of the role of the nation state. The right-wing populists know this. That's one of the reasons that they talk about this issue of national sovereignty. I don't know whether the TPP is unconstitutional, but what the TPP is another instrument of transnational capitalism, right? These free trade agreements are all part of that. This globalization of capital, and what it doesn't mean is that the state no longer exists or is no longer significant. It means that there's a different role for the state as an instrument on behalf of the transnational capitalists. So the issue of labor. So we in organized labor are paying the price for the Cold War purges of the late 40s, for basically thinking that labor is only about wages, hours, and working conditions, that it's not about a social vision. But what has happened recently is, relatively recently, is that there's a turn that starts to unfold. And I actually think, and it was interesting you raised this thing about the NEA, because I remember this training that they put together back in the 80s, was this? And it was like unlike anything that any union had. It was
Dorothy Massey.
yeah. It was about the right wing, or it was about the right wing. I said, wow, right? So you start to see this slowly moving. The AFL-CIO right now is engaged in a national anti-racist project. And it's never done this before. And there's some weaknesses to it. But the fact is that they're attempting to engage their members. In Washington State, there's an attempt to do this with the Washington State AFL-CIO, but even going further, to actually talk about history, right? Not just to talk about contemporary issues, but to really situate the anti-racism in understanding the actual history of the United States as opposed to the myth. All right, so finally, the final point about what people should do, read my book. Right, you can read this book, but no, in all seriousness, what should people do? Well, I think there's a number of things. So one thing I think we have to pay attention to about the moment we're operating in is that we may be on the verge of an electoral realignment. And see, in United States political history, this doesn't happen very often. When you have a significant section of the Republican Party saying, we're not going to vote for this idiot, and actually he is betraying conservatism, as they say, Houston, we have a problem, right? This may be betraying something that I was wondering whether was going to happen, which is that there may be an unraveling that plays out within the Republican Party. Not sure. I don't think we should go home and put bets on it, but it is possible.
Hope springs
eternal. What is very possible in this election is that many of the conservatives are going to ignore the presidential race and concentrate on congressional and senatorial races. And basically just say, if Trump wins, he wins. If he doesn't, he doesn't. I don't give a damn. I'm going to focus on where we can make a difference. That, I think, is more likely. There's also possible realignment within the Democratic Party as a result of the Sanders campaign. But one of the things I think we should be careful about on the left is that after by successful I mean energizing electoral campaigns, whether it was the Jesse Jackson campaign, to some extent the Kucinich campaign, now the Sanders campaign, do not sit back and assume an organization is going to emerge. Because among other things, people get involved in electoral politics for very different reasons than they do organizations. And for one reason alone is that elections end at a certain point, whereas organizations don't. And so assuming that all of this is going to come together, I think is wishful thinking. I think, however, what I would encourage is the building of organizations, plural, left progressive organizations, and that what we actually need to do is state by state, do an assessment and attempt to figure out what is the road within the context of currently existing democratic capitalism. What is the road for building some sort of popular power? That's what I think that we actually should be doing right now. And it is a state by state, it's like looking at the map and figuring out what states, what social movements, what are the forces that need to be moved, what are the unions that are there, what are not there, what's the current state of the legislative black caucuses, which in the South, by the way, is a very, very important instrument. Making that kind of analysis, I would argue that is what needs to be done now. And to the point about the Occupy was a very heroic, very important movement that I would argue, along with others, reshaped the 2012 elections. But the deficiency, and in part related to issues of anarchism, the failure of program, the assumption that simply by saying we are here And we are here in visible protest to inequality. That was very compelling. It's not enough. It's not enough in a fight for power. The fight for power really has to have a proactive element. And I don't think, and this is not to smear in any way the people that were there. And I actually think that more people on the left were supporting it than you were identifying. And there were unions that were supporting it.
Lots.
That in some cases blew me away. I mean, people that would never have done this in the past, who were there. And I thought, okay, this is very important, but it's not enough. And that's why I think that our thinking about strategy has to change. And final point, I know I said the last one was the final point. It ain't gonna happen as a result of one conference. I know there's a number of conferences that are being planned, and that's all good. To paraphrase Jose Marti, when he was interviewed right before he was killed in 1895, he said, we had to begin in silence. And one of the things that the right has understood is that when you're serious, you have to begin in silence. You don't begin with this massive call and expect that the horses are at the starting gate, the bell's ringing, and everyone shoots out. What people like Weidrich, Vickery, and others did in the late 60s, early 70s was under the cover of darkness. It was quiet, and they recognized that building a movement needed three spheres: an electoral legislative, a litigation, and mass movements.
Absolutely.
And they understood how to put that together, and either many of us, including myself, were dismissing the right, dismissing electoral politics, etc., or we were asleep at the switch. And we've paid the price.
Weirich. I met Weirich a couple of times, like I've met Phyllis Schlafly. These are smart people. Don't think they don't out-organize us. But one of the things that I was an advisor on the PBS series with God on Our Side, and one of the things we asked the film crews to ask the people who were being interviewed, like Falwell, was, where did you learn how to organize, right? Where did you learn all these techniques to build grassroots movements? And they said, literally, on camera, oh, we studied the civil rights movement and the labor movement. Duh. And because that's how you organize. Organizing is the same no matter who's doing it. We need to be very careful right now. Guy Standing talked about the precariat in a book. The precariat are those people who have unpredictable employment, and they are split in between those people who are ready to support Trump and those people who want to see something more in terms of guaranteed job security. On the other hand are the precariousness of the white working and wage earning and lower salaried people, two different things. And if the right needs to consolidate this white group of wage earners and salaried people, do not blink if they immediately start talking about government welfare programs for these folks, because that would not be the first time. And I just have to share with you this medal from 1934 for Labor Day in Germany, which has a hammer, a sickle, and a swastika. The right will use anything in order to stabilize its mass base, which in this country is angry white people who either are downwardly mobile or fear being downwardly mobile.
Thank everyone for coming. Thank the panelists for the very provocative and rich talks, and all you guys who participated. It's a lot of heavy stuff, and we all get emotional about it because it's really important. That's okay. We still had a good dialogue, which is great. So thank you all for coming.